So for those who don't know, my favorite game in the Sonic the Hedgehog franchise is Sonic Adventure 2. And one of my favorite characters is Shadow the Hedgehog. To me, he's one of the most emotionally complex characters in the entire series, while also, unfortunately, being one of the most disappointing as the series goes forward. But what if we could fix that? No, this isn't going to be a video going into intricate detail about the myriad of ways in which we could fix Shadow's character. No, this is something much more simple. What if he just died? There's a lot of people in the Sonic fandom that believe that Shadow would have been a better character had he just stayed dead, letting his arc from Sonic Adventure 2 remain what it was. Adventure 2 did really give him a complete story when you think about it, a story that he had to kinda retread between the events of Heroes and Shadow the Hedgehog and even a little bit in Sonic Battle. He started off wanting revenge on humanity and ended not wanting that. And while I personally like the story of his title game and also the events he gets into in Sonic 06, I do have to say it would probably be very interesting to retread a lot of those stories without his existence. So here's the deal. We're going to be going over mainline games. For the most part, we're probably going to make an exception for Sonic Battle. My reason being, Battle is such a story-centric game, and if it weren't for that, I would treat it just like the Sonic Advance series, where the most important thing we got from each of those games is a character carryover like Cream the Rabbit. So you'll see what I mean. When we get to Advance, we'll get to Advance. But I want to try to see what happens in the timeline when Shadow is absent. What would happen if, after the events of Sonic Adventure 2, Shadow had stayed dead? Now, obviously, the first game that this really affects is Sonic Heroes. The story of that game, in short, is that Metal Sonic is trying to take over the world under the guise that he's Eggman. Eggman is trying to find a way to get back at Metal Sonic, and he uses Team Chaotix to do that. Various characters get caught up in the cacophony because of all the different data points that Metal Sonic has to bring together so that he can turn himself into his ultimate form. There's a couple of snags that we're going to run into with this story, though. For one, part of Metal Sonic's plan is to copy Shadow's biodata. We find out in the IDW comic series that Shadow's biodata is one of the pieces required to allow him to enter his Metal Overlord final form. So that final battle is going to be a little different, but let's talk about that story, because for Sonic, Tails, and Knuckles, their story's largely going to remain the same. Aside from nixing the one-off encounter with Team Dark before the final battle, there's not a whole lot that changes in their actual story. Metal Sonic will appear at the same moment, and Chocula and Cheese are still part of the story too, so Team Sonic and Team Rose will still encounter each other during the exact same point of the story. However, where things get interesting is when we start talking about Team Dark. Normally, Team Dark is comprised of Shadow the Hedgehog, E123 Omega, and Rouge the Bat. In this story, however, we're not going to be seeing a Team Dark. There's no reason for one. In the original story, E123 Omega is created as a guard robot to handle Shadow the Hedgehog as he is recovering from the events of Sonic Adventure 2. The secret treasure that Rouge is looking for at the beginning of Sonic Heroes is Shadow. Without Shadow being alive anymore, there's no longer a reason for E123 to be positioned here, nor is there a reason for Rouge to enter this story at all. For all intents and purposes, she's just off doing her own thing or working on another mission for GUN. Honestly, this also makes it hard to justify Rouge being in any of these stories after Adventure 2. But now we need to talk about Omega. For those who don't remember, E123 Omega is the final of the E-series robots. The reason Eggman continued to make these robots after the rebellion of E102 Gamma is because he never saw Gamma rebel. The last Eggman saw of Gamma was of Gamma fighting Sonic on the egg carrier as he ran to go create Chaos 6. We saw in Sonic Adventure 2 that he had made the E1000 series, basically a grouping of near-identical robots who all looked like E102 Gamma. He must have figured that Gamma was so successful, he wanted to replicate his work, and he would continue to use that model repeatedly, even bleeding into Sonic Battle. But Gamma's story directly leads into Omega's. Now, that rebellious phase of Gamma is not going to exist in Omega the way it did in the original story. In the original story of Sonic Heroes, Omega ends up rebelling against Dr. Robotnik because he's tired of having to guard Shadow. Having been deactivated and forced to guard Shadow for we honestly have no idea how long, causes him to resent his creator to the point where he decides to destroy all Eggman robots, not unlike Gamma decided to do at the end of his story. Without a Shadow the Hedgehog to guard, there really isn't an inciting event that will cause Omega to rebel against Robotnik. So for the purposes of this story, E123 Omega will be fighting alongside Metal Sonic. Given that Metal Sonic's plans are to utilize Eggman's likeness to acquire all the data that he needs so that he can take over the world, and finally beat and best Sonic himself, it makes sense that he would use the literal strongest robot that Eggman has at his disposal. None of the other Eggman tech has any problem obeying Metal Sonic's orders in his Eggman form, so I don't see why Omega would be any different. Heck, even in the multiple battles with Eggman during the game, Omega never can tell that it's actually not Eggman, but Metal Sonic in disguise. Unfortunately, the story in Heroes is so sparse, though, that outside of this bit of information with Team Dark, nothing really changes until the final moments. During the final fight with Metal Sonic, when all of the 3 teams are organized, instead of a fight against Metal Overlord utilizing the Super Form, we're instead going to have a final showdown utilizing Team Sonic, Team Rose, Team Chaotix, and honestly, this pairing of Metal Sonic and Omega needs a name, so we'll go ahead and call them Team Metal. I don't see any reason to assume that the various teams involved would not have brought Chaos Emeralds to the fight like they did in the original story. Everybody brought those believing this was a final showdown with Eggman anyway, so why don't we do something interesting with that information? We know that under normal circumstances, the Metal Sonic series can go super utilizing the Master Emerald. I don't see any reason why they wouldn't be able to do so using Chaos Emeralds as well, especially when you take into account that Metal Sonic has copied Sonic's biodata. So let's go ahead and lay out this story with all the information we have. Our narrative here begins in Eggman's prison cell, confronted by Team Chaotix as the rain pours in the background. Thunder crashes as Vector asks, "Then who was it?" to a disheveled Eggman, who's currently sitting on the ground, and in the background, Charmy B and SBO can be seen leaning in to hear the response. Vector continues, "Who locked you up here for trying to conquer the world?" Taking a moment to collect himself, Eggman begins to recount what happened. "It was Metal Sonic. I upgraded him to finally destroy that blasted hedgehog." "Metal Sonic?" Vector inquires. "Well, that doesn't make any sense. We trashed that thing with Knuckles ages ago." Eggman starts his rebuttal, getting up to proclaim his genius to the world. "You fool! He is my ultimate creation, perfect in every way. After seeing the potential in Project Shadow, I knew he could best Sonic, if only I pushed his design a little further." This moment of boisterous elation leaves just as quickly as it comes, though. Eggman skulks back onto the floor, defeated, knowing what he has to explain next. "Unfortunately, I programmed him to go to any lengths necessary to best Sonic. Something must have gone wrong. He must have felt that I was in the way." At this moment, Charmy the Bee pipes up, "He's right, though. You always lose. You're a loser." SBO shushes Charmy. Sometimes, even when you're correct, it's best to just leave things be. Eggman looks as if he's about to reply to this latest outburst until cacophonic sounds can be heard from outside the prison walls. At this, Team Chaotix races out to determine the source of the chaos, with Eggman skulking in tow. What looks to be another Eggman is glowering down at Teams Rose, Sonic, and now Chaotix as Eggman brings up the rear on the top of this shuttle that housed Eggman's prison in the Egg Fleet. "Pitiful life forms," begins the Eggman with the high ground. "How you must envy my greatness." Always quick with the rebuttals, Sonic responds from the ground, "The only thing you're great at is getting your butt kicked, Eggman." This makes the pseudo-Eggman chuckle, but he notices that the real Eggman is approaching. Pointing at the pseudo-Eggman, who we know as Metal Sonic, the real Eggman begins, You took everything away from me! And now I'll take everything away from you as well!" The bravado is noted, but Eggman doesn't have access to any of his technology right now. He's gonna have to rely on the 3 teams that are here. Unfortunately, things are about to get a lot worse for him, because at that moment, we can see Omega bringing up the rear behind Metal Sonic's Eggman form. Amy sees this and immediately yells out, "Mr. Robot, I knew you'd come back!" But After a while, she realizes this isn't her Mr. Robot. This isn't Gamma. Unfortunately for Amy, she has not gotten any better at identifying her friends and love interests. Narratively, this will be the first time any of these teams will have even seen E123 Omega. And in this introduction, instead of fighting Metal Sonic, the teams will first have to contend with Omega. The reason I think this would happen, honestly, is because in the original story, Metal Sonic had everything he needed to go into his Metal Overlord form. He knew that on his own, he was more powerful than the 4 teams facing him combined. He didn't account for the power of the Chaos Emeralds, but that's besides the point. This Metal Sonic must know that without access to that form, he doesn't really stand a chance against the power of all the 3 teams combined. Because of this, he decides that he's going to use Omega to wear them down. And if you remember, Omega is able to take down Shadow on his own. Shadow, the ultimate life form. While a good bit of this can be chalked up to the fact that Eggman designed him specifically for the purpose of being able to take down Shadow, the amount of power you actually need to accomplish that task is fairly impressive. Because of this, I have no problem believing that he would be a threat to all 3 teams combined, especially since he wouldn't be worried about causing any collateral damage to his own team, seeing as none would be there present. The comics have shown us a few times what an unhinged and fully powered Omega can do, so we're going to go ahead and play with that here. The Pseudo Eggman addresses Omega. Unit E123 Omega, the latest in my E-Series robots. Do your true master a favor. Eliminate all of those pesky life forms below. Omega primes his machine guns and nods the affirmative. He locks on to each and every target, but pauses when he sees the real Eggman, taking a moment to try to catalog any visual differences between this seeming doppelganger and the true Eggman who he believes is by his side. But he comes up short. He sees no visual differences. His programming won't lock onto Eggman and instead focuses primarily on Teams Sonic, Rose, and Chaotix. Now, this isn't because he cannot kill Eggman. Omega can hurt Eggman. His programming does not stop him from doing that. This is an oversight that Eggman has had over a number of his creations, including Metal Sonic himself. But I don't believe that he would willingly harm Eggman without having a reason to do so. And given that his brain works in a sheer set of binaries, seeing the 2 Eggmen together, Omega wouldn't have a way to determine which one's which. Not yet, anyway. And his prime directive that he was just ordered to do was to take on all the life forms below. So he'll just catalog Eggman in a solve this problem later and proceed to battle Teams Rose, Sonic, and Chaotix. Now, it's hard to say whether or not Omega would kill anyone from Teams Rose and Chaotix. He's certainly got the ability to overpower Charmy B, and Cream is strong in her own right, but not really that powerful without Cheese by her side. We know that Big can handle some astronomically powerful foes, though. He was able to fish Froggy out of Chaos 6. I have no problem believing that Big and Amy can at the very least stand toe-to-toe with Omega, at least for a while. Sonic, Tails, and Knuckles have also been through the ringer, each of them having to contend with Chaos 6 themselves. However, there is an aspect of this fight that I think I really need to delve into, and that's that none of these teams know how to work together. Team Sonic, Rose, and Chaotix respectively are pretty good at what they do, but when they're trying to handle a single threat as a unified unit, I have no problems believing that 90% of the issue would be them tripping up over themselves. Sonic jumps in the air, ready for Tails to launch him directly at Omega. Vector charging in to fight Omega, trying his best to dodge bullets on the way. Espio turning invisible and using shurikens to try to protect Charmy as they fight. But here's where we run into another huge problem with this battle. Omega is fighting at range with guns, not laser pistols that can be dodged easily. No, he's fighting with guns. Like real guns. I think most of the Sonic cast is hardy enough to survive a few shots, but I also think it's safe to say that nobody comes out of this battle unscathed. A few stray bullets from this fight would make their way to Eggman, though, as he desperately tries to run for safety. Obviously, we're not going to do anything crazy like fatally shoot Dr. Eggman in the final fight with Metal Sonic, but this fight is definitely a lot messier without this being just a straight one-on-one battle with Metal Overlord. Omega is strong enough to handle most of the Sonic cast on his own. Sonic tries to get in with a handful of spin dashes after being launched by Tails, but nothing is really able to penetrate Omega's armor. He doesn't exactly have any noticeable weak spots the same way a lot of other robots do that Eggman makes, and Omega was made to be able to withstand some of the hardest damage Shadow can put out. And at his base, I do believe that Shadow is more powerful than Sonic. Knuckles and Vector should be able to get in and make a few dents, but I think the heroes of this story are going to be a little different than who you might expect. You see, the problem is nobody can really get in close for long to Omega. He's able to just keep on firing bullets and missiles at them, keeping them at bay. This is where I want a wounded Eggman to come up to none other than Big the Cat, because I think Eggman would have a plan to handle this situation.
Hey, big guy,
Eggman begins.
Hey, little guy.
Big, being easily distracted from the combat, begins to start a conversation with Eggman.
How good are you with that fishing pole?
Eggman begins to tell Big his plan. He wants him to try to grab Omega from range with the fishing pole and pull him towards him. You see, Eggman has witnessed Big literally fish Froggy from inside Chaos 6. As far as he's concerned, this is a task well within his abilities.
Sure, if it'll save my friends.
Big the Cat begins to reel back his fishing pole, about to cast a line directly at E123 Omega. Everyone is ducking and weaving the various shells that are coming out of his body, but a fishing line doesn't have any of those problems. It's mathematically improbable that a stray bullet will actually clip the line before this plan can work, and that's what Eggman's counting on. The line is cast, and the hook is successful. Grabbing on to the frame of E123 Omega, Big begins to reel in his catch. Omega is still firing bullets everywhere. Everyone is still having to dodge, but he's firing blindly now, being thrown face first on the ground by the fishing hook. An injured Eggman begins to work his way towards Omega, trying to stay in a blind spot so that one of his arms can't randomly fire a shot at him. He rips off Omega's back panel and immediately attempts to deactivate him. Omega's hands shift from machine gun mode into hand mode in a desperate attempt to grab Eggman and rip him off of his body, but it's too late. Eggman has typed in this sequence so many times before, it's like second nature to him. No amount of speed would be able to stop him from typing this out as fast as he could.
There. That should do it.
Eggman breathes a sigh of relief now that there's no longer 9mm rounds firing out everywhere. Everyone is injured, but no one is actually down. Miraculously, Big the Cat is completely unharmed. But this still leaves Metal Sonic.
I guess there's no more reason to keep the charade up.
With a speed that should not be possible for Eggman himself, he jumps off of the tower that he was originally standing on to land gracefully in front of all of the injured teams.
How you must envy me.
He begins again while slowly melting into a metallic pool, Terminator 2 style, on the ground.
My loathsome copy.
Now we can see the starfish-shaped head of Neo Metal Sonic appear for the first time to all three teams. Unlike in the original story, this isn't where he transforms into Metal Overlord. In this version of events, there is no Metal Overlord. Without Ultimate Lifeform Bio data, he has no way to achieve this form. And this is where the final battle with Metal Sonic proper begins. I know in the original Sonic Heroes, a lot of people were wanting an actual fight with Metal Sonic, and not that weird giant kaiju fight we got in the end. In this version of events, I think we'd finally get to have that actual battle. To keep things simple, it's going to be just Team Sonic, an injured Team Sonic at that, against Metal Sonic. Aside from Big, everyone else is too seriously injured from the battle, and I really think this is the point where Big would be taking care of everyone. Even Eggman can be seen trying to administer some first aid to his would-be enemies. After all, if they die here, he's not going to survive much longer. There's no reason for Metal Sonic to keep him around if he's already this far into his plan. If Sonic's dead, there's no way to tell what Metal Sonic will do next. His prime directive will have been fulfilled. He can't gamble on him just going back to serving him once that's over. From here, the battle with Metal Sonic truly begins. Knuckles tries to slam his fists into the ground, hoping that the shockwaves will be enough to unseat Metal, but unfortunately, His turbine keeps him from having any issues. Tails begins to duck and weave in an attempt to try to distract him, while Sonic makes a direct attack for his chest. All of this, however, is going to be in vain. Sonic and Metal Sonic go mostly toe-to-toe in most stories, with Sonic always having the advantage of adaptability. In this moment, though, we have a Sonic who's taken heavy damage from Omega, and a superpowered Neo Metal Sonic who, as we've seen in the IDW series, has no trouble going toe-to-toe and besting Sonic repeatedly. Because of this, I think Sonic would rely on utilizing the Chaos Emeralds to get a super form advantage against Metal Sonic. There's a snag, though. In the original story, we see that every team has collected a handful of Chaos Emeralds. One of them has not collected all of them at once. Seeing that things look bleak, Eggman shouts out,
"Only if we had the Chaos Emeralds, then we'd have enough power to defeat him."
Hearing this, Tails pulls out his Chaos Emerald and immediately takes a beeline away from the fight to show that they at least have won. At this moment, every single member of the other teams shows that they've collected a Chaos Emerald each as well. It's almost a miracle, but they have all 7 Chaos Emeralds just like they did in the original story. Trying to hold all 7 Chaos Emeralds in his hands, Tails yells, "Quick, I have to get these to Sonic!" Through his peripheral, Sonic sees what Tails has in his hands and immediately makes a beeline for the emeralds. In the original story, we got a Super Sonic granting a shield to Knuckles and Tails. In this version of events, though, I think we should do this fight proper. As Sonic begins to make his way to the emeralds, so does Neo Metal Sonic, and Knuckles in tow. As Sonic is trying to absorb the power of the emeralds as they're spinning around his head, as he's beginning the transformation into Super Sonic, something goes horribly wrong. Neo Metal Sonic gets in the ring as well. Metal has copied Sonic's data. He has the ability to go super just like he does. Sonic knows that he can't just force Neo Metal outside of the power that's siphoning down to him. If he had that kind of power, he wouldn't be relying on a super form in the first place. Instead, he quickly shouts to Knuckles and Tails to get in as well, since they're the only ones of his team that have also utilized super forms in the past. A blinding aura emanates from the Chaos Emeralds as all 4 are engulfed in their power. From here, we see Super Sonic, Super Tails, and Super Knuckles, all with fully healed injuries, but unfortunately they're now squaring off against a super-powered Metal Sonic. Now, we've seen in the IDW Sonic series that Sonic and Knuckles, along with the help of Shadow, are able to, at the very least, survive for a time against Neo Metal Sonic's super form. This leads me to believe that Sonic, Knuckles, and Tails in their super form should be able to overpower him. No longer are they hindered by the fact that they're injured, and Sonic has literally been able to go toe-to-toe with gods in his super form. I don't believe that Neo Metal's super form is going to be more powerful than the combined efforts of Sonic, Knuckles, and Tails. But here's the thing. I also don't believe that this battle would end in their super forms. I think that this would turn into a stalemate while they're in super mode. We know that the super form has a time limit in Sonic's canon, and we know that they're nigh invincible when they're in it. I think at this point, Sonic, Knuckles, Tails, and Neo Metal Sonic would duke it out until the super forms ran out, leaving them in their fully refreshed states. This way, the super form's basically going to be functioning as a sensu bean for them, meaning from here, a proper final fight with Metal Sonic can actually take place. Having been regrouped and refreshed, a new plan is concocted between the 3 of them. Sonic is going to run distraction. Metal Sonic hates Sonic. He believes he's his loathsome clone. Sonic's own ego can be Metal Sonic's Achilles heel. Sonic runs distraction, making sure that Neo Metal Sonic is constantly training his eyes on him and him alone, while Tails does his best to launch Knuckles in various ways at Metal Sonic. Sonic himself cannot break through the armor of Neo, but Knuckles? He should have no problem doing so after a handful of attempts. And yeah, I recognize that I'm taking this entire plot point directly from the Sonic 2 movie. Bite me. It was a good idea, and there's no reason it wouldn't work here too. As Neo Metal Sonic's strength is slowly being sapped away by the repeated bombardments of Knuckles, he finally gets into one last clash with Sonic, both in their spinball forms and both trying to overpower the other like it's a Dragon Ball Z energy fight. And that's when one final Thundershot launch of Knuckles from Tails should be able to finally break through the last shards of Neo Metal Sonic's armor, disabling him for the time being. A tired and worn out Team Sonic quickly turn to Eggman and demand he deactivate his latest problem that they've had to fix. Under normal circumstances, a demand like this would not be heeded well by Eggman, but in this case, it's kinda life or death. Like he did with Omega thanks to the help of Big, he moves himself as fast as his injured body will let him to the fallen Neo Metal Sonic and tries to get into his backplate to deactivate him.
Apparently I have a few bugs to work out still,
he tries to say nonchalantly to the teams around him. Since he's already doing his job, though, nobody's paying any attention to him. Sonic moves his way to a fallen Cream and Amy and goes, "We really need to get you guys to a hospital." Eggman has done some surprisingly good and efficient triage work on everyone. "Do we have the Egghead to thank for this?" Cream nods, and Sonic turns around to see Eggman working on Neo Metal Sonic. In that moment, Sonic decides to let bygones be bygones for now. Eggman isn't exactly a threat to them in this moment, and despite the fact that he probably should do something about this, all just barely survived the skin of their teeth, and there's probably more important things to worry about, like getting everyone medical attention. They're all going to have to find a better way to handle Omega in the future, because while Sonic was able to handle Gamma without being injured too much, Omega was a completely different beast. A nod is given to Big the Cat for literally saving all of their lives with his fishing expertise. And I think that is where we're going to close out the story of Sonic Heroes. In my mind, while most of the major story beats of this game stay the same, because it's not really a story-heavy game, the biggest differences to me all come down to the final battle. And I think that going forward, it would be a lot harder to divorce E123 Omega from the services of Eggman. Much like how Team Chaotix is comprised of 3 members, and Team Sonic and Rose is, I think a Team Eggman can actually work from this point forward. After fully reprogramming both E123 Omega to properly recognize him as Master, and when we saw in Sonic Rivals that he reprogrammed Metal Sonic as well to be a lot more subservient, I think these two combined would make Eggman a much more formidable fighter, since, let's be honest, if he's in a mech and Omega and Metal Sonic are both trying to grab you, you're probably toast. But his over-reliance on these deadly machines will probably come to bite him in the ass as we go forward into stories like, say, Sonic Lost World. Those are stories for another day. For now, I want to know if there would be anything you would have changed about this story. I know that I leaned a little bit into the violence from Omega, but dude's literally made of guns. Come on, this was bound to happen. But let me know what you think in the comment section below, and if there's anything that I left out of the story that you would have preferred me addressed. And the next chapter in this saga is going to be Shadow the Hedgehog. We're going to be going through the entirety of that game's story without the titular character. And I've already got some ideas as to how that story takes place, but I'm also very open to suggestions. So let me know in the comment section below if there's anything you think should be addressed in that story. I'm all for incorporating ideas into the series because it's a what-if series. We can do whatever we want with it. For me, it's gonna be weird finding interesting ways to utilize Omega. One of his defining features for the longest time in Sonic's story is his rebellion against Eggman, his want to destroy all Eggman robots. But I think without Shadow being there as a catalyst, there's no reason for Omega to betray Eggman. At least, not yet. I've got some plans for when that might happen, but let's just say the first chink in that armor is Eggman having such a readily available way to deactivate him. I think we might be using that as a thoroughfare to see what happens with Omega to get him closer to how he acts in the games. Or maybe we'll keep having fun with the different ways we can utilize Omega as an actual pawn of Eggman. So many of the final battles in this series are a lot harder if you factor in him having that kind of firepower support. And finally, I'm not 100% certain where this story is going to go since we don't have access to Shadow for things like Sonic 06, but we'll see what happens when we get there. With that said, though, if you haven't subscribed already, please consider doing so. It really does help the channel out, and I'd like to see this channel grow going forward. I do want to thank all of you for watching, and there's going to be a lot of patrons I want to thank who are going to be shown in the credits after this as well. While most of you are there supporting my main channel, you do give me the flexibility to work on projects like this. And with that said, let me know where you think this story should go, and I look forward to continuing it. But with all that said, everybody, thank you very much for watching, and as always, everyone, insert end of video tagline here.